And now we come to our second speaker, Marcus Hughes, Head of Indigenous Engagement and Strategy at the Powerhouse Museum. Marcus' work on the recent opened exhibition Linear is groundbreaking for the museum. Marcus will share some of his insights about his process to bring the exhibition to fruition. Please welcome Marcus Hughes.
Thank you, Deborah. And Joe, thank you so much for your welcome this morning. There's always something quite wonderful about hearing Joe speak that fills me with the stuff that helps keep me going in these crazy old places that we work in. As you can hear, a little croakier than I normally am, and I'm so pleased that I'm back here for my annual moment at the Stakeholders Forum. So we'll talk a little bit today about some of the challenges that we face when, as an institution, we start to embrace different ways of working that are more culturally appropriate, or the language is always tricky. It's about not wanting to create silos, because that's not the way that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people work. We work in a holistic way where the approach means that we stick our fingers in everybody's pies. And when you're working in a colonial institution where there are really specific ways of working and doing business that have been embedded and installed for a very long time, there are a whole lot of challenges around the languages and the ways we communicate and the ways we move forward. So, Linear. The lines that bring us together, and looking at new ways of working with old knowledges. I just want to share some words with you that helped really start the conversation about Linear, about why the institution was agreeing to embark on a process where, rather than an exhibition being and again, it's about language, isn't it? Rather than an exhibition being curatorially led, it was an exhibition that was led by the Indigenous voice. And it was really important in this process that we did look at notions of connectivity and communication. We really wanted to share as a cultural group messages that helped explain the way that we are connected across country, that then impacts on the way that we come together to work on specific projects. So those words were from David Moajali, and this is his drawing of the Australian continent. It's all about line and connection and points of intersection. They're song lines, they're bloodlines, they're lines of narrative, they're lines that are about knowing country. And they are constructed in a way by David that really connects us to it physically, that connection of the body and the spirit to country. So that really does inform the way we communicate. And it really informed the way we built the exhibition, that it was about, again, lines of connectivity. So even though there are lots of things in the exhibition, lots of objects, lots of things to look at, what I'm hoping is that in the exhibition, when you go to see it, and certainly the feedback that we've been getting, is that this is an exhibition about people. That was David, this is Bernard, Marie, Lorraine, Marindu, Vicky, Nicole, Mr. Nalamata Jr., Lucy Simpson, Glenda Nichols, Wayne Quillam, Out on Country, Using Technology, Recycling, Moving to Advanced Technologies, Living with the Impact of Technology, the old ones and the young ones. They all live in this exhibition. They're all telling their stories. And their stories about cultural practice from a long time ago to the future. So it's kind of simple. It's not complex. It's not rocket science. But when it actually comes to putting something like that on the exhibition floor, working with a system that has been in operation for a very long time, we encounter moments of confusion or moments of unexpected privilege, or shall I say unexpected sense of privilege. So this is David's map. We've come back to it. It's a remarkable thing. It tells us and gives us so much. And it's available. You can Google and it'll pop up. But for us to work with Uncle David's image and his words and his story, it meant that we had to connect in a meaningful way with his family. We couldn't just go, oh, we'll pay the license fee and we'll replicate and we'll do whatever we need to do with it. We had to spend significant time identifying who his familial representation was, negotiating with them for the permissions to use the work, but also to give them the context in which we were going to use the material. And that was a remarkable process. And a great process, not so much for the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that were working on the project, but for our non-Indigenous colleagues in the institution who have been working with those systems that have been in place for a very long time. So today, we're really excited that we're finally going to receive a boomerang made by David Uniapan. Uncle David is the one that you see on the $50 note. He's referred to as our own Da Vinci, and in some publications, in around 1914, he was headlined as Australia's cleverest darkie. So there's some really interesting material around that. Again, we went through a really, really rigorous process of connecting with Uncle David's family, of communicating with them about the exhibition, the intent, the way we would treasure his work, the way we would represent that, and the way the family would connect with that process. The reason we haven't opened the exhibition with the inclusion of Uncle David's boomerang is because even though we'd done proper communication way, blackfella, and got the approvals and the endorsements and the support, we also had to get a letter from the Premier of South Australia confirming that we could have permission to move the boomerang from South Australia to New South Wales, which was great. You know, at least the state government is, going through business around proper protocol and ways of working and all of that kind of business. But unfortunately, it didn't really embrace the way that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people work together. So once again, the mission manager stepped in and he signed off a piece of paper. And today we now, despite the agreements we've had with the Unipen family, now we have the permission of the Premier of South Australia to include Aboriginal cultural material in an exhibition. So it's again, ways of working. We have to be responsive, but it's a challenge. In our collection, we have 176 objects from the Maningrida community, and we really wanted to honour those objects in this exhibition and that community. But when you go to our register, when you click on and do the search the collection and you type in Maningrida, what pops up is this wonderful essay around Professor Haynes and his wife, who collected those 176 objects from Maningrida without any detail of who created them or the object's significance. So for us, it was really important that we build that relationship with the Maningrida community and we bring them in so they can see this material and they can advise us on how to present that work, how we care for that work, and how they can give support to our conservation team. And that's been a really wonderful process because our teams are now feeling like they're getting to do things right and proper way. But again, this takes time. We've had one visit from some of the Maningrida elders. We've got another one this week. But there is such demand on them to provide knowledge, information. They've been really pleased that what we're trying to do is actually connect them to the objects as the owners of that cultural material and as the people who will interpret that cultural material. So time has a great deal to do with ways of working that we need to embrace. We also need to be able to surrender to the environment around us. If we are of country, if we are living country, if we are connected in the way that David Moajali says, then we have to be responsive. And unfortunately, what happens is the mortality of our people sometimes means that we have to stop for a little while. And the reason I referred to David, no, not to David, to Mr. Nalamata Jr. is he passed away in June this year, not so long after we acquired this remarkable triptych. That then brought about a whole lot of cultural protocol that we had to observe. We couldn't just say, oh well, we bought it, we're going to put it on the wall. We had to go back to his community, to his family in Arakoon, to get the advice on how we move forward. Do we exhibit it? How do we name him? Can we use the resource material that he's provided? So after several months and getting really close to the exhibition opening, we're still in that position of trying to get advice from community around how we move forward. It's a beautiful image, it's beautiful work, and we needed to get an invitation out so people would come to the exhibition. And we were really keen and hoping that family would come back to us and say, yes, you can use his image. And they did. 2 days before we had to get it designed and distributed. So I was quite comfortable with all of that, but there were a lot of other people working in the institution who had been working with systems that have been in place for a very long time, that are a little twitchier than I am, but we got through that. In the extreme right of this image, you'll see a black and white screen. This is another situation where a mob in Kimberley of Māori people had made a documentation that was about, made a film that was about the digitisation of documentation of their removal from country and their first contact with Europeans in 1964, one of the last communities to be connected. And one of the young ones in this film passed away in June. June was a really bad month. So there was a whole process, again, about can we show this anymore? How do we move through? And Ani Nyamaru, the grandmother of the young one, was very distressed about having the time to think and recover and consider a way forward. And 6 days before the exhibition opened, we had approval from Auntie Nyamaru because she believed in what we were doing and the way that we had been so respectful in engaging with that community, that she was prepared to compromise to make her granddaughter's voice stay within the film and for us to screen that. So when you go and see that, please consider what a privilege that is for us to be able to share Auntie Nyamaru's story. So then it comes to the objects and the artists. Marie Clark's work, architecturally sized water reed necklaces, 50 metres long, suspended in space. Vicky West's 143 rings to honour every year since the passing of Truganini, suspended in an open space. Nicole Monk's sitting place, gathering place. One that is reliant on people sitting and meeting at it to increase its life, its meaning, its significance, its relevance to our communities. But then you introduce a conservation and registration team who aren't quite used to having people touch our objects. And yet we've got this team of cultural workers who want people to touch our objects. That means there's a lot of negotiation. So we've had a whole lot of business around time. We've had a whole lot of business around negotiation. But then we come to people like Lorraine, who makes these remarkable objects that she goes through country, and rather than digging up country, she digs through the rubbish and transforms it into objects of great beauty. And she creates her rendering of a possum skin cloak out of corrugated iron. Lorraine lives on country. Lorraine doesn't have an email account. So when it comes to all of those great forms and licenses that are around, yes, you can, no, you can't. What are your details? What is your business structure? It doesn't quite work. So we have to become much more responsive, people are finding. And what's been terrific about this process is that the teams have been incredibly responsive to new ways of working that may appear to be quite chaotic, but are deeply, deeply solid in the notion of the humanity that brings us together to make exhibitions like this and to be able to tell those stories. And then we have this that looks a whole lot like a stick, because it is. And when you go into the exhibition, you'll see a lot of sticks. There's 250 sticks in one of the installations for every language that was spoken before contact and for every year since contact. But this particular stick is called a wop. It's a harpoon for turtles. And Murrindoo Yana, another remarkable young man from up the Cape, killed two crocodiles with this particular wop that was made by his uncles. And the local police ended up looking inside his fridge, and in his freezer they found a whole lot of crocodile meat. And those police wanted to get Murrindoo, but Murrindoo was a very strong man and said, no, these are our crocodiles. We will kill them if we want to. We will kill them if we need to. We will kill them to eat them. So Murrindoo took his conviction to the High Court, and this particular harpoon is the harpoon, as I said, that he killed those two crocodiles with. But it's the harpoon that gave us hunting rights through the High Court. It's a remarkably important piece of our history, of our shared histories. But Murrindoo, as I said, lives up in the Cape. Not real good with the email, not real good with the forms, not real good with all that sort of stuff. That process of getting permission, documenting permission that we all need in institutions that have ways of working that have been in development for a very long time, got this. Now, how do I make this work? It's a video. I wonder if we can do that once more with sound. Where's he gone? Oh, here he comes.
Bernie, what's mine is yours, brother. You know, you're free to use that wop for spearing the mob at the Opera House, wherever. Take it to the powerhouse, you know. Do what you got to do, bro.
And that is our official documentation of permission to exhibit that object. And I'm really proud of the team that I worked with here that was so open to new ways of working, that were culturally appropriate, and that accepted this as our formal records. Thank you.
it is a beautiful exhibition, and while you're thinking of questions to ask Marcus, there's microphones around there, and the exhibition is adjacent or just across from the foyer of the theaterette. Please go and see it in your breaks. It's a beautiful exhibition. So any questions for Marcus?
Hello.
Could you not put your hand on the base of the mic because it stops the sound? That's it, perfect.
Hello, Samantha Friend from Bathurst. A lot of us who have collections have Indigenous material, but it's really hard to find somebody who can guide us through the minefield and the quicksand that is putting Indigenous objects on display. Is there someone? What do we do? Can we ring you up and say, help? Is there a body? Is there a national body or even a state body that can give us some guidelines and things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I also, I sit on the National Council for AMAGA, the Australian Museums and Galleries Association. And part of my brief on that representation is the rollout of the 10-year Indigenous Roadmap. So that's available online. It's a great provocation and has a 10-year plan. The first tasking that we're looking at with that is the establishment of an Indigenous Advisory Committee that has representatives across the country so that we can work on that rollout. Yes, we've been developing and delivering a series of webinars that you can tune into, or they are kept online. But certainly when it comes down to the business of in your own country, it's really about how do you develop those relationships with the knowledge holders in your community to start with.
There are plenty of knowledge holders.
Yep.
They are they don't talk to each other.
Yep.
So we ask advice of one group and we get what we believe is right.
Yep.
We ask advice or hear from the other group who completely undermines what the first group have said. So we're stuck between lots of information and we don't know which one is right. We don't know which one we should be going with, and it comes down to almost to the point where we take the Indigenous material off display because we don't know whether we're doing the right thing or not, because we can't get anybody to agree. It's really, we want to have the Indigenous material on display, and we should. It's our duty to share.
Yeah, I'm just going to jump in there and say it's not your place to make that decision. It is the position of the owners of that cultural material. You are purely a keeper and caretaker, so whether you want to put it on display or not is absolutely irrelevant to the conversation. It really has to be about the relationships that you develop, and we can only keep going back to this is cultural material that is owned by the people who created it. As part of our Indigenous protocols here, we absolutely acknowledge that the ownership of cultural material rests with the creators of that, or the families of that, the creators of that cultural material. So it's a tricky place, and we have to move through that because we can't keep saying it's really hard. And I totally sympathise because, you know, I have the same issues in dealing with contested country, and we experience, and I hate to say it, but there is a huge amount of lateral violence within our own communities around cultural protocol and practice. But that, as Joe said, is one of the results of the cultural interruption since contact. So, you know, yep, it's hard, but life is hard. And when we're really focused on keeping our young ones alive, keeping them housed, keeping them safe, it's often difficult to come together to talk about museum business.
There are more important things.
Yeah, so it's about how do how do you develop those relationships in a meaningful way that sort of move above the local disconnect? Yeah, absolutely. One of the ways we've done it here at MAAS, because we are always on contested country, and we're about to move on to contested country, is to develop those individual relationships in a respectful way. But because of our remit as a statewide and national and global significant organisation, it's really important that we do move to another place of negotiation. So we have 2 elders in residence, Bruce Pascoe and Anifemi Vostok. Bruce, because of his significance as a knowledge holder within the sciences, and Anifemi as a knowledge holder within the design field. So they have no direct contact to country, so we don't have that agenda to deal with at that level. And that's been really helpful, because it does mean that our negotiations can move beyond that. Yeah. Pleasure.
Well, could you please put your hands together?